Hi, and welcome to another episode of Words with Al. On this one, we will continue on looking at the idea regarding how language developed. So here we are going to delve straight into, well, pretty much the factors that led to development itself, but also speech, because development and speech are very closely tied together. So in this presentation, I've kind of like tried to feed these AI models my idea so that it can conceptualize it or and test it with all other theories out there. Obviously, it's just an AI theory, so I mean AI model, so it can't do all the work. But that is where I come in, and obviously other people too. But I want to share my findings because I believe they can open up a perspective that is unknown to us today. So that is that. Okay, so let's begin. We have language, power, and civilization, a radical reinterpretation. Okay, so how speech was born among the people and then weaponized by elites. So you have to bear with me here, okay, because it didn't start out this way. Okay, so uh, we were first very selfless. Well, not very selfless, we were absolutely selfless because we hadn't developed a self, we hadn't developed an ego. That took time. So we did not have an ego in the beginning, and meaning that we neither did we have speech. So when we discovered or realized that we existed, we actually operated as one consciousness, and like bees, like ants. We were just a unit, and and that these realizations would spread, but it will begin with specific people, and then those would spread within that group, and then and so on and so forth. But uh, in the beginning, these discoveries were shared, right? Because we were very few back then, and we didn't compete. We didn't have an ego. There were no civilizations in the beginning. There were just one big family, one big group that spread and spread and spread and spread and conquered Earth without speaking anything. So they just shared their knowledge as they went along and as they met other people. They tried to share using, well, arms or whatever, really, drawings on the sand or on the everywhere, because they needed to explain things. But if they didn't need to explain things, which they most often didn't, because there was nothing to explain back then, because there was no curiosity either. They were just going about their daily lives, like instinctual. So it wasn't really a big magic question mark there, because they just went around living as they have been doing for, well, since forever, right? Since they emerged on Earth. So that is what happened. But development would change that, or knowledge would change that. And this is what we also see in religion, with these religious stories telling us about how um, we fell from heaven when we ate from the tree of knowledge. So the tree of knowledge divided us because it gave us gains, and it then created the hierarchy that would later be abused by the top. So that, but that would also drive development further, because it will always be a competition of who is the best and who knows the most and who can employ and has most power, who has most power. Yeah, okay. But that was not how it began. Okay, so I tried to explain that to these AI models as well, but it just couldn't really encapsulate it because, well, it is full of data that has a lot of historical accounts, but not a timeline, because obviously it doesn't know about the time when we do not have written records, when we just had speech. Because remember that speech is our oldest knowledge, right? Okay. Written form is now the speech, but in the beginning that was not the case, and we spoke much longer than we wrote. So a large part of our history remains unknown to us today. Yeah. So the reason why I also landed on that we did not have any speech in the beginning is that we did split very early on and settled all of Earth, but then this knowledge, this quest for knowledge began, and it seems that it somehow began there in Middle East, where it accumulated and then would spread to other people, which means that language or knowledge, ideas spread faster. It wasn't driven by genetics. This was not driven by genetics. We will come to see that, okay? Sorry, now I've been just talking, talking, talking. I haven't even gone into my presentation. But that is because there is so much to say. And I don't know where to begin because there is, yeah, it's a bit difficult to know where to begin there. Okay. Language began as a collective tool. That is what it did. Language began to signal to knowledge. Knowledge came first. Like, people learned how to lit or ignite or to start a fire before they could speak, even. Most probably because they didn't need to speak, they just needed the two rocks. They just needed to know, to get the idea of what makes it lit, what makes a fire start. That is what they needed. They did not need speech. They just needed to see it being done. They needed to see someone perform the action of doing it, and then they would just replicate the action, and then that will be it. There was no need for words, right? Words came later, speech came later, and that is how suddenly knowledge began accumulating and gathering. People began gathering knowledge. They wanted to know what everyone knew. It's because someone realized that, oh my goodness, this knowledge is power and we need it. We need all of it. So that is what initiated this, the greed and quest for knowledge. Yes, which was obviously driven by a selfish being, because that person must have been the first one who had developed an ego, meaning the elites. Yeah. Wow, that was a lot of data there, a lot of information there. I hope that you still here with me. Uh, but that is what happened. That is what happened. Language began as a collective tool. It did. First, to spread knowledge because we were selfless, and then later with speech. A bit later, though, and then it became a play by the elites. Well, I will explain it. Okay, let's just read. Sorry, I'm just so passionate. I just want to go on and continue and just talk and talk and talk. But I need to have something to, well, I want to give you something to hold on to, because I can go on and talk and talk and talk, but but that is not the point here. The point here is to convey. Egalitarian origins, sorry, egalitarian origins, right? So shared knowledge strengthened early communities. That is what it did. This laid the foundations for the first civilizations. So the first civilizations were selfless, okay? They were not driven by slaves. They were driven by us all. Yeah, we all partook in activity, which was civilization, because we were all part of it. We all realized that we all had a role to play in it, whether it be a builder or a baker or whatever. It was a role in that society you had as a man or a woman. So we all saw that, acknowledged that, and partook in that, and respected that, and honored that, and died for that. Okay? Do not joke. We're not joking, right? This was civilization. This was life. This is still civilization. We're still talking about me and you, and mankind, and man and woman. But this is what happened. We gathered, we learned from one another, and then we spread it because we acted as a unit. We were much more collective because back then, when we were very few, w- we realized or knew, obviously, because then it was very early on, that we all came from the same mom and dad. Yeah, we pretty much knew that. Okay, that was not unknown knowledge to us because that was very apparent, visible. You could see that. And we could also see that we were a part of life. There was no distinction. The ego was not, an ego didn't exist. We did not have an ego. So everything we did for the group because we were part of the group. We were part of nature. We were part of mom and dad, and we were the kids, and we had kids, and we wanted to take care of our kids, and everyone wanted to take care of their kids. So we were all in union in this protective, nurturing, and collective civilization. We protected and loved one another. That is what we did. And that is what led to the first civilizations. But with time, unfortunately, this would decline. With time, this would not longer be driven by love and a strengthening of the community, but rather by something else. Okay, so we went all right there already. Okay, see, I haven't gone through these PowerPoints honestly because I don't need them. I can just talk and tell you what happened, or at least play with the ideas, and then the right idea will pop up because because we're on the right track. This is the right track. You don't need to believe me. This is the right track, and it will be revealed in time. I don't need to do anything. I'm just sharing. Okay. So the elite hijacking from unity to control. So as these civilizations grew, right, power began accumulating. And this power was knowledge. You had the knowledge of fire, you had the knowledge of the wheel, of building, you had the knowledge of the trees, of medicine, you had knowledge of a lot of things, okay? And these things, these people on the top realized very fast that, well, this was much later, right? When the number of mankind had reached a good proportion, you could say, so that it could actually create civilizations. Not one, but more, right? Because we have passed the first one now. The first ones were selfless, and then the other one were not. And when I say the first one, I mean like literally maybe just the first one. Okay, maybe the first one is was enough for us to become very selfish because we became so many people, and that was the first time that we had accumulated such wealth and such knowledge and such unity that it only naturally would lead to the hierarchical pyramid that would later create the elites, then and later on the exploitation of the poor or the commoners. Okay. So this is what my whole thing about my theory is. I know that we probably had an older civilization. I don't know that. Okay, I don't know that. I What I'm holding on to right now is that Egypt was mankind's first big civilization. Okay, and it is much older than we think it is. Yeah, because we just think it is 5,000 years old, but that is not what it is. It is much older. It is maybe 50,000 years or 30. Well, maybe 50 not, but 30, or even under that, maybe 20. But that is significantly much more than five. Yeah. And I lean towards that there probably was a disaster or something that, not necessarily a disaster, but well, okay, I'm going to explain that a bit further. But I'm what I'm leaning toward is that Egypt was the first selfless civilization, but that the dynasties that would follow will slowly and gradually become more and more and more and more and more selfish, right? Because it began as a selfless tribute, almost like an honoring of God, of creation, of light, of space, of matter, of time. All these Egyptian gods are not gods; they are actually principles of existence itself. Okay, they are science. They are math. You have even the names math, math, thought. Thought is thought, literally thought. The idea has not changed. Just our understanding of what has happened has. Okay, because we haven't understood anything, but we are understanding it now. And Ra is still Ray, and Anubis is where you fall. Ubi, Ubi, which means this is where I will fall and die, or the body will fall. So that is what will fall. So, so these gods were not gods. Our first ancestors who built the pyramids, because they built them. There were no aliens. Sorry, there were no aliens. It was just we who were so intelligent and selfless in our nature and love for creation that we actually created a civilization for all. And we probably built these buildings. Well, I know why we built these buildings and what they are supposed to tell us, but I will not share that here. I will share that later on in a book that I am writing. But so this, and then this Egypt, the civilization in Egypt, would later gradually decrease, or it wouldn't decrease, but it would decrease in moral. Moral. There was no such thing as a moral, but it was, because remember what was being developed. The ego was being developed because there was no ego before that. There was just selfless consciousness. There was just being walking around and being one with nature and everyone else around them, because if anyone felt pain, they instantly felt that pain too because it bothered them. They didn't want to see pain, right? Because we were all part of life and we all knew pain, we all knew suffering, we all knew these bad things, and we didn't want them. So we always took care of one another quite naturally, like this, like a family. We were a big family. That is what we were. We were one big family, and then with time this family just got corrupted. But it wasn't corrupted, but it kind of was. Okay, it was. We have to say that it was, but it wasn't, because that was the natural stages of development, what was happening here, because we were developing an ego. But this ego, in the eyes of the selfless, was obviously not very beautiful. This was not very beautiful at all, because this self represented um, something sticking out, something saying it is special and not part of nature and the rest of the thing that we were all part of, right? So the selfishness was sticking out instead of nature that is selfless, kind of. It then, well, okay. So that is what happened. Civilization reached a peak. Boom, this golden age, we're all a big family, we're all shared in these findings and ideas and understanding of reality and existence. But then with time, we will become more and more selfish. We did not want everyone to know, and we did not want to share our findings with everyone. And then we get to this point, from unity to control. So as societies grew complex, elites, kings, priests realized language's power. Okay, this is where it gets very freaky, because this is very freaky, and not only very freaky, but also very relevant today. This is relevant now. Okay, do not be distracted by my art over here or anything else. You have to listen to what I'm saying. This is unbelievable. Okay, you won't believe it, but it is true. Okay, so sacred words. We have sacred words. Okay, this is very strange. We have mantras and divine decrees and legal codes. Yeah, we do. But this is what they began doing. They created that. They understood that language is very has this resonating power for our bodies, right? These sounds, I can use sounds to scare people. So sound became almost like magic, because people had never seen speech. They never heard speech. It was only like maybe cry. There was just cries, baby cries, and hunger cries or pain cries. But there were no other sounds. We didn't need sounds. We could count without sound. We could analyze. We could even predict stuff without sound. We really could. Um, it's math, right? We don't need math. Math doesn't need sound. But this is where it began. Suddenly, we started putting signaling sound for knowledge, right? So fire got the sound, realization got the sound, the sun got the sound, gravity got the sound, or darkness, because they didn't know gravity, but they knew that there was a pulling power. Some things were falling here. They knew that. That is why Ra also means falling. Sun, the sun ray, the rays are falling. Okay. So that is what happened. They realized that language can be assigned, or we can assign not we can assign sound to knowledge, and then this knowledge is easily transferable. I can easily teach it, so that straight away. I can signal, oh, fire, fire. I don't need to come and tell you, or signal you in any sense or way. But before that, when we were probably selfless, well, okay, no, I will stop there. Yeah, okay, let's just stop there, because now I'm gonna digress too much. Okay, so I started digression, but I'm trying to cover like all the aspects and all the areas over here and back here and in here, and yeah, and it is a bit messy. But okay, so monopolized communication to cement authority. So this is where we suddenly begin, when we start getting more civilizations occurring at the same time. This is when we get competition. This is when we get two egos. Before, there was just one ego who started, or I mean, the elites were the first to develop an ego, obviously, and these would then start manipulating the people under them, right? And they would be like, oh, this is where we get the stories from Moses and stuff, where the Egyptians told, the elites told the others that you're slaves. And that was the beginning of the slaves. That was probably the beginning, because then the elites, the one who inherited the Egyptian empire, like thousands of years later, because this took a long time, probably, they began viewing themselves as gods, and the remaining ones as slaves. And that is when we begin to get the slave history. But that didn't come until very late. Okay. So this is when this whole story becomes very freaky and very scary, but also very sad. This is sad. Everything here on is very sad. Um, but it is also what has happened. So it is what it is. It's not as sad as it is because we're not there anymore. Time has moved on. We're now in different places in time, and different types of civilization exist now, thankfully. But still, this laid the foundation that is still operating today. Okay, the elites are still manipulating the poor. That is what is happening here. Yes, so language then would later on become a geopolitical weapon because sound made information more readily available and you could gather it. Now you could send one person who knew a lot and teach a whole group of people lots of stuff. Now they could learn fire and they can learn how to build brick walls, or well, not brick, but walls, um, and houses and chimneys and whatever, like the things that they needed and they knew of, right? So that so knowledge became suddenly something that cannot be shared because knowledge was power, still is. It still is power. And the elites knew that if everyone knew everything, then they could not be elites, right? So, so that is what happened, and then yeah, that is where we are today. But this is where it gets even more freakier because suddenly they realize that oh my goodness, I can create a language, one that is artificial. I can distance myself from the people. I can make a language that only we understand. Like, even this was not necessary, but because nobody knew how to read and write, it was only the rich ones the elites, who did in the beginning. Well, in the beginning, actually, everyone was taught because it was a selfless society. And then later on, it became less and less and less. Well, no, yeah, I think that speech actually was much later. Speech became much later. Speech came with that whole selfishness because the self and the speech um, are one and the same. Speech, thought, self, the same. Because a group of people can't speak, only one can speak. Right? Yeah. So that is what happened. So apparently, they didn't want us to know. Nobody wanted us to know anything because if we knew, then we would have power. And if we knew that we could learn everything and anything and have the knowledge of everything and pretty much learn it and create stuff, and then that would pose a threat, and it still does. So the people's resistance. Knowledge always leaks back, thankfully, right? And this is what the justice of it all is, that the elites can't really run away, but they have for at least 2,000 years, or even a bit more. We could say probably like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, at least. Yeah. So, so that is what we have here. We have sound being taught or assigned to knowledge. And then that was held secretive and not shared with other groups because you didn't want another civilization to conquer yours, right? So suddenly we had to create a different language so that nobody else understood what we knew, so that the other ones would not come and conquer us. Oh my goodness. This is how it went. So, okay, so now you read this one, The People's Resistance, fine, and then Modern Implications. All right, guys, so I'm just going to continue. So, yes, Modern Implications. The cycle continues today. Elite control, academic jargon, legal tech terminology, people's reclamation, internet slang, revive indigenous languages, right? So the people will always fight back, and they always do that in rebellious forms, which probably now is, well, I'm not going to use those terms because then this video probably will be demonetized. But so then the question is AI the next frontier of linguistic domination? And it really isn't, but it might be because of if the ignorance on top is so great, then it will trickle down, which it has for a long time now. And together now with this knowledge, I'm trying to really share our beginning, how we developed, and what makes us great, what makes us amazing, because that is what we are. And okay, so I'm going to wrap this video up with the conclusion here. This is not a conclusion because life is still ongoing. We don't know what type of civilizations we will see in the future, but hopefully better than what we are in, and that is where we're headed. Unless we, well, it doesn't matter. Okay, language is power, and power corrupts language. Okay, this is what happened. Language is power. If I knew something that you didn't, then that would obviously give me a really big advantage. And even more if you were still and I was speaking and I knew tons of stuff that you probably knew as well, but you had never heard this speech before. So it was very binding. It was very convincing. This speech worked almost very well into your psyche because you loved hearing speech, and we still do. Very strange, this speech, but very hypnotic. Okay, so origins. So these civilizations were first collective and democratic. They were democratic or selfless in nature, not democratic as we know today democracy to be, but more as in they worked for the group. They were collective. Everyone was fed, everyone had a place to sleep, everyone was safe, and everyone was nurtured and protected at all costs because we worked as a big family. Final thought to reclaim language is to reclaim freedom, but rather, I would say, to reclaim knowledge and being free of speech or language itself and not be tied to it is what freedom is. Well, right? Being still. Stillness is freedom. And stillness unites us all. It did back then, it does now, and it will forever. Because stillness is our real speech. That is what it is. So thank you for listening. Have a good evening or day, wherever you are, and see you next time. Cheers.